The Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. Thank you to the committee members who are joining us online on WebEx. It's a bit of a new technology that we're working with, so bear with us if there are some glitches, apologize. And that's also why the committee room looks the way it does, because we've got committee members appearing online. The weather was a bit of a problem getting here today, so they're going to appear online. I'm going to, when I speak, I'm going to be able to remove my mask because it's far more than 6 feet away that I'm sitting from any other committee member or person. We're in the largest committee room in the Capitol. The ceilings are more than 2 feet tall, and everyone is socially distanced and taking care of precautions. Today, it's my honor. We have a special guest in committee, Mr. Majority Leader of the Senate, Senator Suellentrop. So welcome to committee, Senator. Thank you for joining us here today. And just so the online viewing public knows, it's the rules of the Senate that for a committee member to ask questions of conferees during a hearing, the committee member must be present in the committee hearing room. So we won't be taking any questions from committee members via WebEx today. We'll first start off then with a comment about the time of committee today. We are meeting at 11 a.m. rather than our usual 10:30. A question that's come up with committee is what our usual meeting time is. Our usual meeting time is 10:30 to noon. Due to the business of the committee today, we're going to be extending that usual hour and a half to 2 hours today, and we're going to try to keep as close to on time as we can. So with that, I will make a request for any bill introductions. Yes, seeing one. Go ahead and approach the podium, please, and state your name and who you're with. Welcome to committee.
My name is Steve Kearney. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association with a bill introduction request. It is 21 RS 0484, dealing with the subject of statutory speedy trial.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney. Are there any objections to the introduction of the bill? Hearing none, the bill will be so introduced. Thank you. Are there any other bill introductions that we have today? Seeing none, I'd like to make a comment regarding the conduct of the hearing today. We will move to the hearing on SCR 1602, and we will open that hearing. An observation regarding the streaming, and so that we can have this run smoothly and that so all the conferees can be heard. It's been suggested that committee members, when in the room, please speak clearly and closely into your microphone so you can be heard. And also at the podium, if you're a conferee, please make sure that you're speaking clearly and directly into the microphone so that those listening online can hear you. And it also takes a moment for the camera on WebEx to switch from viewer to viewer. So those who are speaking on WebEx, please make sure you pause a moment before you would start your testimony. And I would ask everyone, whether you're in the committee room or testifying online, that you please state your name and which organization with, or whether you're a private citizen, so that everyone listening can be duly informed. We do have a what I'll call a substitute revisor working with the committee today, and that would be Mr. Matt Sterling. And we have our research online as well, Ms. Natalie Nelson. So we have some kind of rules that are going to govern our conduct here today. We've got 10 proponents appearing to testify orally today, and 10 opponents as well. So with the time that we have, we're going to divide the time for proponents, 35 minutes, with 10 minutes of questions, and then 35 minutes for opponents and 10 minutes of question. That leaves us a little bit of leeway for some technical glitches and the like. So we'll get through this. If there are committee questions from committee members, we're going to limit them to questions for the conferee. There's not going to be any speeches given or grandstanding because time of our conferees is limited, and those kind of comments can be reserved for the Senate floor where there is no time limit. And with that, let me make sure we've got the time correct. And I would ask that if research could actually, could I have a moment, please? With the timing for the conferees, we're going to allow we can do 40 minutes for proponents and 40 minutes for opponents. So that will be 4 minutes per conferee, and at the end of proponents, we will have 10 minutes of questions, and at the end of opponents, we'll have 10 minutes of questions as well. So that gives us about 10 minutes of fill in with technological glitches that we may have along the way. And we've got timing for each of the conferees. If my Mr. Ranking Minority Member could operate the timer, since my vice chair is appearing by WebEx, that would be appreciated. And again, 4 minutes for conferee, and with a 1-minute warning from Senator Haley, and then I'll be cutting the conferee off at 4 minutes. So just so everyone knows ahead of time. And with that, we will have the reviser please give us the bill brief and a summary of what the bill does.
Thank you, Chairperson Warren. This is Matt Sterling in the Reviser of Statutes office, and good morning, committee. I'll note quickly, Jason is on the WebEx as well, so you have both of us available to answer questions. Hopefully the committee received my memo concerning SCR 1602. I'm going to just kind of walk the committee through the procedural aspects of the amendment briefly so that you can get on to your policy discussion and hear from the conferees. So Senate Concurrent Resolution 1602 would amend the Bill of Rights of the Kansas Constitution by adding a new section to the Bill of Rights regarding the regulation of abortion. That new section would state that nothing in the state constitution requires the government to fund abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. The new section would also provide that the people of Kansas, through their elected state legislators, may pass laws regarding abortion. Those laws would remain subject to the United States Constitution's protections of an individual's right to abortion. Procedurally, as with all concurrent resolutions that propose amendments to the Kansas Constitution, this resolution must be adopted by a 2/3 vote in both chambers in order to be presented to the general electorate for approval. In this case, SCR 1602, if it is adopted by a constitutional majority by both chambers, it would call for a special election to be held in conjunction with the primary election on August 2nd of 2022, pursuant to Section 1 of Article 14 of the Kansas Constitution. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that the committee has.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Does the committee have any questions for the reviser? I have one question. Some people have been asking, the resolution as it's written, is it a ban on abortion?
So the resolution as it's written states that nothing in the Constitution requires the funding of abortion by the government, and the Constitution does not create or secure a right to abortion. It doesn't legislate either a ban or an allowance. It just simply says that there's no right to an abortion in the Constitution.
Just to be clear, it's not a ban as it's written, is that correct?
It does not ban. It says that you would not have a right to a constitution guaranteed under the Bill of Rights in the Kansas Constitution.
Thank you. With no further questions for the reviser, we will move to our first proponent conferee. Oh, excuse me, there's another question. Senator Haley.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarity, Mr. Sterling, if the question is put on the ballot before the electorate, it only requires a simple majority of those participating, or would it be 2/3 of those participating?
Thank you, Senator. It requires a majority of the voters. It is a 2/3 majority for it to be submitted of both chambers of the legislature for the question to be submitted to the electorate.
Majority by the electorate during the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Haley. With that, with no further questions for the reviser, we'll move to our first proponent conferee. That would be Jean Gaudoun, Kansans for Life. Welcome to committee, and give us a second to make sure the timer, we've got that started. Yes, at 1 minute, we'll give you a 1-minute warning. Thank you, Senator. Go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Warren, members of the committee. I'm Jean Gaudoun, Director of Government Relations with Kansans for Life. And you have my written testimony. I would like to cede my 4 minutes to our conferees, Elizabeth Kirk and Brittany Jones. And Jeanette Pryor with the Kansas Catholic Conference would also like to cede her time, her 4 minutes, to those conferees as well.
Very good. Duly noted then. If we'll then add 3.5 minutes. Okay, 4 minutes, 3 minutes and 40 seconds to conferees Jeanette Pryor, Elizabeth Kirk, and Brittany Jones to be divided as we proceed. Do I have that? I don't have that right? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Gaudoun.
I apologize. Jeanette Pryor with the Kansas Catholic Conference would like to cede her 4 minutes as well.
Got it. Thank you. So we will add 4 minutes and then 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So that's 7 minutes and 40 seconds to Elizabeth Kirk and Brittany Jones. So with that, we will proceed to call on Elizabeth Kirk. And I believe she's appearing by WebEx.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Before my time starts, if I could just ask the WebEx people to stay muted because there's feedback if they unmute themselves. So thank you, Chairman Warren and members of the Senate committee. I'm very
Just a moment, you're muted. We need to unmute on WebEx. Can we make sure we have that unmuted? Speak again, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Warren and members of the Senate committee. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you again this year as you consider the Value Them Both Amendment. My name is Elizabeth Kirk. I'm a legal scholar and faculty research associate at the Catholic University of America School of Law. I'm also an associate scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. I've studied and written on the Kansas Supreme Court's decision in Hodes and Nauser versus Schmidt, and I want to share with you my concern about its scope and then also explain why the Value Them Both Amendment is a reasonable response. In Hodes, the court discovered a natural right to abortion in the state constitution, completely departing from long settled Kansas law. No court in 160 years had ever believed that such a right was contemplated by the text or the history of the 1859 Constitution. And in discovering this right and declaring it to be among Kansas' most fundamental rights, the court adopted a judicial standard of review that is so protective of abortion that it is virtually certain to both unsettle existing Kansas law and to discourage future common sense laws, resulting in a more permissive landscape for abortion here in Kansas than has ever existed under under federal law. And understanding this, and in particular understanding why I'm not fear-mongering, requires a brief recap of the key features of the two landmark U.S. Supreme Court abortion cases, Roe and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And given the constraints, I've submitted an extensive written testimony, many details, support, citations, et cetera. I urge you to read that. This is necessarily brief. So Roe, landmark case in which the U.S. Supreme Court held that laws involving a woman's decision to terminate her pregnancy implicate a federal constitutional right to privacy. And the court determined there that any challenged abortion law has to be analyzed under the highest level of judicial review, known as strict scrutiny. And when a law is challenged under the standard, it's presumed unconstitutional. And the burden is immediately shifted to the government to prove that the law that they passed is narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling state interest. And the standard is so rigorous that it's referred to colloquially among lawyers as strict in theory, fatal in fact. The government almost always loses such challenges. And the Roe court acknowledged, though, that even fundamental rights aren't without limit. And so it said in the abortion context, states do have legitimate interests and they grow as the woman approaches term. So they've set forth a trimester framework to account for those interests. And under that framework, under Roe, during the first trimester, there's no state interest that is compelling enough to justify any interference with the woman's decision at all. But more weight was afforded to the state's interest as the pregnancy proceeded. So in the second trimester, the state could consider maternal health. And then after viability, states could further consider the human life of the child and further regulate or even prohibit abortion after viability. In the years after Roe, because strict scrutiny is so rigorous, very little legislation survived this standard. Because maternal health wasn't even allowed to be considered in the first trimester, courts invalidated first trimester clinic regulations. Courts also struck many laws that have a lot of support among most Americans, like parental consent, 24-hour waiting periods. A notable exception to Roe's rigor was the consistent ruling that the right to abortion did not carry with it an affirmative public funding obligation. Almost 20 years later, the court revisited Roe in Planned Parenthood versus Casey and affirmed the right to abortion, but lowered the legal standard of judicial review because it determined that strict scrutiny was too strict. So the court said strict scrutiny had led to the striking down of many regulations which in no real sense deprived women of the ultimate decision. They also said that the state's legitimate interests during the early stages of pregnancy hadn't been given enough with any weight. And so they created a new standard, undue burden, and they replaced the trimester framework with viability. And that test remains the governing federal standard today. So with that background of federal law, I want to then turn quickly to the Hodes decision, and I hope it'll be clear why I say Hodes is more extreme than federal law ever was. So first, the Hodes court adopted the old strict scrutiny test. So they explicitly considered and rejected the standard of Casey. They said undue burden is less demanding than is appropriate for such a fundamentally important right. So what that means practically is that laws that would be constitutional under current federal law, but which were stricken before Casey under the old Roe standard, like 24-hour waiting periods, parental consent, those are now vulnerable to be stricken. We don't have to just look back at those old pre-Casey cases, though, to know that this is likely to happen, because this is exactly what has happened in other states that have adopted strict scrutiny. I set this forth in detail in my written testimony, footnotes 55 through 66. But when a state recognizes an independent state right to abortion, like Hodes did, and adopts strict scrutiny, it's the beginning of a long line of cases striking common sense regulations. Alaska, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey struck funding restrictions, parental consent, or notification. Minnesota struck public funding restrictions. Florida struck parental notice and consent. Iowa struck a waiting period. Montana struck a requirement that only physicians can perform abortions. Tennessee struck down informed consent and 24-hour waiting period, all under strict scrutiny. And the Hodes Court signaled, I mean, this isn't just me, worrying about it. The Hodes Court signaled that it finds those other states persuasive because it relied on many of those decisions in crafting its own, notably the ones that required public funded abortion. So there's little reason to trust that similar statutes in Kansas would survive strict scrutiny. I urge you to read Justice Biles' concurrence. He wrote separately to concur. He concurred with the result, but he wanted to express concern with the standard adopted by the court. And he warned, this is a quote, that strict scrutiny jurisprudence will also have potentially unsettling ripple effects in other areas of Kansas law touching on abortion access. And he specifically referenced our informed consent statute, implying its vulnerability. The Hodes decision was more extreme than federal law in a second way. It went even farther than Roe, I would say, because unlike Roe, in describing strict scrutiny, the Kansas Supreme Court made no allowance for that growing interest that the state has in the life of the child in the womb. So acknowledges that the state may have some interests, but it doesn't explicitly provide any framework to account for those interests. And Justice Biles, again, wrote to note his concern about that point. So even those regulations which survived Roe, like post-viability restrictions or born alive bills, could be declared unconstitutional under Hodes. So I hope that helps to help you understand how very sweeping the Kansas Supreme Court's decision is, and how it's not an exaggeration to say that Kansas is poised to become among the most permissive abortion regimes in the nation. All existing laws are vulnerable in the way I described, and moreover, future laws proposed in this body will be immediately subject to the good faith objection that it's unconstitutional under Hodes, so a waste of time, legislative time and resources. In response, if I might conclude, the value in both amendment is very modest. It does only two things. It removes the newfound natural right to abortion, returning Kansas law to the pre-Hodes status quo, and it returns to the legislature the ability to regulate abortion. And, the way I describe it is that we all know abortion is terribly fraught, it's politically divisive, but wherever you are on the spectrum, Hodes went too far. Whether you're pro-life and you believe there's no right to abortion under any circumstance, or whether you're pro-choice and you believe in women's access to abortion, but you want those that to be available in a safe and safe way, or you're somewhere in the middle, like you're kind of okay with abortion typically, but you are uncomfortable with taxpayer funding of it, or you're uncomfortable with late-term abortion of healthy, viable infants, you should be concerned about Hodes and supportive of this amendment. It's modest, it's reasonable, it simply restores authority to the legislature and leaves this thorny question of abortion to the political process of deliberation and compromise. I can stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kirk. We'll take questions at the end after all the proponents have testified. So we'll move on then to our next conferee is Brittany Jones with the Family Policy Alliance. Welcome to committee. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Chair Warren and members of the committee, my name is Brittany Jones, and I am an attorney and director of advocacy for Family Policy Alliance of Kansas. We advocate for policies that strengthen families and stand for life across the country and ally with over 40 different state-based organizations who do the same. Today, I want to talk to you, building on Professor Kirk's testimony, I would like to talk to you specifically about how the Hodes decision will likely impact our current regulations and what those regulations are.
Let me interrupt you just for a second to make sure we've got the timing correct. If Elizabeth Kirk didn't use her whole time, we can add that on to Ms. Jones's time. think it would be a combined 7 minutes and 40 seconds from the first two conferees. It's around 4. Got it. Thank you for keeping track of that. And then we'll add a minute, 10 seconds to your 4 minutes, so 5 minutes and 10 seconds. And it's not subtracted by my interruption. So
No, thank you.
thank you.
I appreciate someone else doing math because I'm an attorney and I don't do math, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you. I would like to look at the four main laws that are most at threat because of the Hodes ruling. And those laws are women's right to know and 24-hour waiting period, parental notification, clinic licensing laws, and finally our ban on taxpayer-funded abortion. So turning quickly to our women's right to know law and our 24-hour waiting period, those laws were implemented in 1997 as one of our first comprehensive pro-life laws in the post-Casey era in order to help women, make sure that women had access to information when they enter an abortion clinic, and also to give them time to think through this decision that they might be making, and give them time to, ask different people in their life and kind of get input, and so that they weren't making this decision in a vacuum. However, as we've seen across the country, when courts have used strict scrutiny, these sorts of laws are actually struck down. So these important protections that provide women time to process information and time to gather information are actually withheld from women under strict scrutiny. We've seen this in a post-Casey, or in a pre-Casey court, so under the Roe standard, as Professor Kirk referenced, and also we've seen it in state courts when they use the strict scrutiny standard. And so these are the sorts of laws that will likely be struck down as we apply Hodes to cases going forward. Under the current standard, the Supreme Court has actually, the U.S. Supreme Court has actually upheld these types of laws, but in states that use strict scrutiny, which is different than the current federal standard, these sorts of laws are struck down. And so in 1997, when these laws were implemented, they were very constitutional under Casey, but now the Hodes Court has put these protections for women at risk. The second area of law that is of a great concern to many Kansans and was also passed with bipartisan support is our parental consent laws, which require that parents not only be notified but provide consent for a minor girl to receive an abortion. And this ensures that young girls are not left alone to have an abortion by themselves. It does provide a judicial bypass, as the Casey court required, so it's completely constitutional under the Casey standard. But as we've seen in cases courts that use strict scrutiny, these sorts of laws are often struck down. And so that is likely what will happen in Kansas once we apply Hodes to this particular law. Young girls will lose these protections of having at least someone there to walk them through the process. And this is helpful in ensuring that girls are not being coerced into this decision. And thirdly, the third area of law that is at risk because of Hodes is the clinic licensing laws. And these are, majority of these are basic clinic licensing laws that ensure that women have a safe and clean clinic to go into. We have a history in Kansas of not necessarily providing women with the cleanest clinics. And I know that in Jeannie Gowden's written testimony from Kansans for Life, she specifically lays out some of those situations. And so this clinic licensing law, after we saw some great abuses by abortionists across the country, was put in place to ensure that women at least have basic health care and have a safe clinic to enter into if they're considering an abortion. But as we've seen across the country, that under a strict scrutiny standard or under a heightened scrutiny standard, these sorts of laws are struck down. And the final area of law, which affects many Kansans and many Kansans are concerned about, even if they are self-described as pro-choice, is taxpayer-funded abortion. They do not want to pay for abortions. And so we placed a ban on using tax dollars for abortion in 2013. And we passed that with bipartisan support. However, even in the Hodes decision, the Hodes court specifically relied on cases that have struck down taxpayer-funded abortion bans. And this is a great concern to many Kansans. The court clearly indicated that this is what they thought their decision meant by using those cases. And so that's very concerning.
1 minute left.
Thank you. In conclusion, it is vital that we continue to allow you, the legislators, to regulate in this area to ensure that women have information and to ensure that they are not left alone to have an abortion by themselves and to ensure that our tax dollars are not used for abortion. I ask that you pass the Value Them Both Amendment and allow the people of Kansas to vote on this very important issue. Thank you. And I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Next, we have Dr. Jonathan Scrafford. I believe he's on WebEx.
Yeah, just a sec. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, and welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself, and you'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Scrafford. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist practicing in Wichita, Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to express my support for the Value Them Both constitutional amendment, which I understand would ensure the role of legislation regarding abortion will remain in the hands of Kansas citizens and their elected representatives. As a native son of Kansas, I am fully invested in affirming the rights and dignity of every human being in this great state. Having considered a wide range of perspectives on issues related to abortion during my undergraduate education in California and my medical education and training in Minnesota, I returned to my hometown of Wichita in 2017 to serve the community that I pray I may be blessed to continue serving throughout my professional life. Modern medicine makes more and more clear over time the status of the unborn child. The mere notion of fetal surgery in the womb affirms the role of the unborn child as patient. Ever-extending frontiers in gestational ages at which premature babies can survive outside the womb show the true value of what may have otherwise been mistaken merely for potential. Nevertheless, these advances merely emphasize that which we know about ourselves, that every human being is to be treated with dignity regardless of his or her stage of development. About 2 years ago, the Kansas Supreme Court interpreted a virtually absolute right to abortion from our state's constitution. This right allows some members of our society, those of us who have been born, to end the lives of the most vulnerable in our society, those who have not yet been born. The field of medicine offers no objective criteria by which to separate living human beings deserving of rights from those undeserving of rights. It is thus deeply distressing to me as a physician to see that the so-called right to abortion does exactly that, to divide living human beings on the basis of their stage of development into classes with different fundamental rights. Such a right flies in the face of science and my own clinical experience. A woman's right to determine what she does with her own body should be respected for her entire life, not only the portion of her life after she is born. I'm fully aware that the issue of abortion is highly emotional on an individual level and in the public square at large. So how can we resolve contrasting viewpoints on an issue so fundamentally important as to whether the right to one's own body begins before or after she is born? The Value Them Both constitutional amendment proposed today would restore the rightful role of the people of Kansas and their elected representatives to guide public policy on such questions. I support such an initiative. It gives citizens a voice in this contentious debate, providing them an opportunity to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. The Value Them Both Amendment provides the people of Kansas the chance to acknowledge for all living human beings the same rights and protections we demand for ourselves and which we demand for women in our society. As a physician dedicated to women's health in my home state of Kansas, I firmly believe that every woman in this great state has a right to her body, even when she is still in the womb. Thank you for this opportunity and for all the work you do for the people of Kansas.
Thank you, Dr. Scrafford. Next, we have up Dr. Catherine Powers, who I believe also is appearing by WebEx.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome to committee, and please introduce yourself.
Thank
And
you.
You'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Senate Chair Warren and committee for letting me testify for this amendment. My name is Dr. Catherine Powers. I've been a physician for 37 years, specializing in anesthesiology for 28 years and hospice and palliative medicine for the past 9 years. The majority of my time as an anesthesiologist was at Children's Mercy Hospital. I have cared for, in the field of hospice and palliative medicine, perinatal, pediatric, and adult patients. I agreed to testify for this important amendment due to the inconsistencies and duplicity that I've seen in my entire medical career with medical and legal double standards. The rules of informed consent for minors were always very stringent at Children's Mercy Hospital, requiring a parent or guardian to sign for procedures and surgeries. And so the implication of the Kansas Supreme Court decision to allow young female adolescents to consent to this procedure without parental or guardian's consent is not standard of care any other place in healthcare. The future consequences to a young mother who may not have parental support or knowledge are potentially devastating to a young woman's physical, emotional, and psychological health. As far as my medical career in pediatric anesthesiology, I have been expected to resuscitate premature babies at birth, as well as during procedures and surgeries. Again, it baffles me about the duplicity of medical liability when I have been expected to maintain and resuscitate life in any premature babies, and yet the abortion industry is allowed to kill babies without any comparable liability. Currently, there are maternal fetal surgeries being performed at Children's Mercy Hospital for congenital abnormalities. Not only is the mother anesthetized for this procedure, but the fetus is given pain medication to relieve the hypersensitive pain response and stress response that would be detrimental to the baby's welfare. Research has shown that babies greater than 18 weeks gestation have developed pain pathways. This especially concerns me when I hear about dismemberment procedures during abortion. These babies feel pain and are silently crying out as they die. During my medical career, both in obstetrical anesthesia as well as perinatal palliative care, I have experienced many women with untimely pregnancies, unexpected congenital malformations, as well as genetic syndromes that would cause their babies to not survive the entire pregnancy or live for only a few hours or a few weeks after birth.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Several of the babies with life-limiting or terminal diagnoses were born and were able to bond with their babies and moms for a short but significant time. Many of the healthy babies have been offered up for adoption, which is a beautiful alternative and a true sacrifice. I thank you for allowing me to testify in support of the Value Them Both Amendment for the protection of both women and babies, and ask you all to pass this amendment out of your committee favorably. I am open for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Next, we have Dr. Jackie Pfeffer, if I've said that correctly.
It's Piper.
Pfeiffer, excuse me, who I also believe is appearing by WebEx.
Yes, I'm here. I'm present. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Warren and the members of the Joint Committee. I'm Dr. Piper. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been a licensed psychologist for 27 years, have a multitude of experiences, including working for DFS, the Osawatomie State Hospital, community mental health centers, private practice. I've worked in women's shelters as well, and work a lot now with foster care. So I have met and worked personally with so many of these persons who are going through issues of abortion and decision making. So the points I want to make very clearly in psychology is that it is not our standard practice to have adolescents consent for themselves for treatment. And it's the obvious logical reasons that they do not have the capacity cognitively and emotionally to make those decisions. And we know that because psychologists have developed cognitive, emotional, and moral theory. And that is how most laws are made. We can compare this to laws of driving, tattooing, piercing, voting, smoking cigarettes. All of these laws were made based on when the decisions can be made in a cognitive and emotional way for a person of such age. So risk factors are very important to psychologists. We know that the literature is replete in risk factors for women prior to making the decision about abortion. And that does include the things you've heard before: coercion, generational poverty, emotional problems that may be pre-abortion choice, such as mental health issues that were treated and diagnosed, along with a multitude of others that I have outlined in my writings. I think it's also important when we think of adolescents having abortions without parental consent, we are also keeping secrets with adolescents, and secret keeping is the root of most post-traumatic stress disorders. So if we as adults and legislators and voters of Kansas work together to develop post-traumatic stress disorder in adolescents, I think we have a very difficult time with our conscience. Secret keeping from the fundamental persons who are birthing and parenting them, seeing them day in, day out. This puts a lot of stress on that relationship and will develop into attachment issues for sure. But we also know with brain development, it puts a lot of stress on the prefrontal cortex. So we have the fight, flight, fright response when we have to keep back information from persons for fear of some ultimate consequence. So I want the legislators to think about that. Also, the research in mental health is wrought with problems with funding. Even our own APA states that women who have abortions show a lot of resiliency. Well, that was my doctoral dissertation, was resiliency. So if we take resilient women and they choose abortion, they'll show resiliency at the end of that. But what about women who have doubt? What about women who aren't sure? What if they are coerced? What if they do have mental health, cognitive issues, and then they have abortion?
1 minute remaining.
Those research results show significant mental health long-term disadvantages. This is very important. And we need more studies and we need more funding that will go for pro-life research in this area. My husband and I have been volunteers for a long time with women who have maintained their pregnancies and went on to be mothers, and we have very much enjoyed that and found it to be a very heroic, virtuous attempt on their part to really make themselves purpose and meaning in their lives. And I think we can help others in this as well. Thank you so much for letting me appear today.
Thank you, Doctor. Next, we'll be hearing from Anne Marie Alvey of Rachel's Vineyard Ministry, Kansas City, Missouri. Welcome to committee. You'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Warren and members of the committee. My name is Anne Marie Alvey. I'm the director of Project Rachel and Project Joseph, which is a post-abortion healing ministry for women and men, and I'm on the Kansas side, actually. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in support of the Value Them Both Constitutional Amendment for Life. In my work, I primarily help women heal from a past abortion or abortions. In the 2.5 years that I've been helping women, my eyes have been opened. I realize now that there are 2 victims in an abortion, the child and the mother. My heart breaks for them. Women have told me, I went into the clinic as one person and came out a totally different one. Though some might feel instant relief because the immediate crisis has been resolved, it's often temporary. Women deal with their pain by coping. They deny, repress, suppress, and rationalize their feelings and thoughts. But a trigger can break through at any time, without warning. This could be a smell, a sound, a sensation, a flashback, a dream, the anniversary date of the abortion, the due date of the baby, or even another pregnancy. All of this takes a toll on women's mental health. They often experience depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, and eating disorders. These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Studies show that many women self-medicate in order to cope with their pain. Alcohol use and abuse has been known to increase 110%, and marijuana use and abuse 220% in post-abortive women. Suicidal behaviors increased by 155%, and for adolescents, it's even higher. Sadly, women aren't told that this could happen to them as a result of their abortion, nor do many even link their symptoms to it. There are also physical risks, including pelvic infections, hemorrhaging, blood clots, perforation of the uterus, cut or torn cervix, and incomplete abortion, which I've had clients report to me, infection and sterility, and I do know women who are sterile because of their abortions. Incredibly, my clients have told me that they were not informed of any of the possible risks of adverse consequences, physical or psychological, before the abortion. In my research, I was shocked to learn that 64% of abortions involved coercion. I checked that percentage against my clients and sadly found this to be true. Coercion can range anywhere from a manipulation to violence. I was astounded to learn that the leading cause of death for pregnant women is not complications from childbirth or even an abortion, but murder. Over half the women in this country are not choosing their abortions freely. Someone else is choosing it for them. To say that abortion is a woman's right only emboldens those who have a personal interest in terminating her pregnancy. For women who are coerced in any way to call it a right further victimizes her. That right will be used as a justification to force some women against their will. Some would argue that these are extreme cases or that women who suffer from their abortions, thank you, are only small in number. What I've come to realize is that most women don't speak of their pain and suffering because of the fear of being judged. And they don't believe anyone will have compassion on them. So it takes profound courage for a woman to even call me. Abortion does have a profound effect on the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health of millions of women. Making an abortion a right without any built-in protections victimizes, at minimum, that 64% who didn't choose their abortion, and at maximum, all those who suffer as a result, including those who freely chose it. Women deserve better. I ask you to consider this when you're making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alvey. Next, we have Maria Canjani. Welcome to committee. You'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to stand in support of the Value Them Both Amendment. My name is Maria Canjani. I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm a mother of 5 and married. I'm also a victim of sexual assault and uninformed abortion. At 17, I suffered sexual assault by 4 high school football players. In that time, I came out of the room and I was told by a friend that it was my fault, that I need to keep it quiet and I couldn't ruin these guys' career and their future college endeavors. So keeping it to myself, I continued with my volleyball career and moved on. When I got injured, I had to go get an x-ray, and before getting the x-ray, you have to know when your last period was, and I couldn't remember, so naturally they did a pregnancy test. When he told me I was pregnant, I was kind of at loss because I didn't know what to do. Do I tell my parents? Who do I go to? Eventually, my parents were informed, and before going to my parents, I went to a friend that said, let's go to Planned Parenthood because that's the place we need to take you. They know a lot. They can help you with what you're going through. When I got there at the Planned Parenthood, I was just checked in, brought back to a room. I didn't need a parent. The lady who helped me with the information, she's just termed things as the thing inside of you, the pregnancy. There was no use of, you have a baby inside of you. I wasn't offered an ultrasound. I wasn't offered about other options. It was pretty much pulling out a piece of paper, some pamphlets with some pictures on it with smiling women, all happy, and a paper of listing all the costs and the drugs that I would be given. And then tucked away, and she asked me when my last period was. Again, I didn't know. And then based on the calculations, it was about 20 weeks that I was pregnant. At that time, I didn't know what 20 weeks meant. I wasn't told, like, that's 5 months along. So I go home, tell my parents where I was. They, at Planned Parenthood before, they just scheduled me for my appointment, gave me some medication to put into my vagina just so I can dilate. Get home, I tell my parents the next time for my appointment, I go back in, and it's just kind of like you check in, they take you back, and it was so eerie because the waiting room that I walked into was just kind of dark. It was cold. There was women that were just sitting there kind of just quiet and sad looking. You know, going back to the visit, the first visit, she never asked me, like, why are you here? What happened? Were you assaulted? Were you sexually hurt? It was just more like, okay, let's get through this and move on. After the procedure, you know, there was no explanation of what was happening. It was just pretty much, you're done, you go out, you go in the waiting room, you're cramping, you don't know why. You go home with a receipt that you paid for the abortion and maybe a piece of paper of like ibuprofen, Tylenol to take. I felt horrible for a long time, even physically and then later mentally, like the psychologist mentioned. I felt like I was treated like a number. I was devalued. I was a very much an uninformed minor. Both of my parents are deaf and they were not informed of what was happening to me. To this day, I still mourn, and basically I'm just asking, because I was a victim of sexual assault, I wish that someone had defended my right to information and refused to use my trauma to advance the agenda of abortion. I ask each of you to be the voice of women in Kansas and for their babies. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your testimony with us today. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for sharing your testimony with us today. Thank you for appearing in committee. Next, we have Jeanette from Rachel's Vineyard Ministry, and I believe she's appearing on WebEx.
Thank you, Madam Chair Warren, members of the committee. My name is Jeanette. Thank you. My name is Jeanette, and I chose to have an abortion many years ago. I would like to share with you how that choice affected me. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak to you in support of the value of both constitutional amendment for life. I was approached and asked if I would share my experiences over the course of the last 37 years related to exercising my rights to have an abortion. I stand here before you because this is only by sharing my choices and their impact can anyone begin to see the lingering effects that no one can really know without living them. My only concern is that words not strong enough to convey the aftermath of a choice that was supposed to fix something. I have to believe if someone had spoken out and been put in my path, I might have made a difference. When I had my abortion, I had no idea what I was entering into, nor the change in me that would take place and reside hidden for many years to come. I remember leaving out the back door after my procedure. It was sunny, the sky had no clouds, and I felt dead inside. I was married, and the abortion would have been my third child. I should have known better, but I didn't. Fear played a big role for both my previous husband and I at the time. He didn't want another child. We arrived at the center, and I remember every detail about this event. This would be something I would never forget. To this day, I can recall every detail. So how was this the best solution if the pain still remains? Something sad, depressing, and destructive had replaced the child that I had terminated. And the fear I went in with could not compare to the fear I came out with. I did not feel relief. I did not go out and share my abortion with everybody, even though it was my right to have one. Instead, I walked out the back door, and I knew through and through I could not undo what I had just done. I knew my life had changed for the worse, even though no one could tell by looking at me on the outside. A week later, I looked like I was 9 months pregnant, even though it was estimated I was less than a month pregnant at the time of the procedure. The darkness and seclusion was building in on me, and here I was a week later being told I had to do the procedure all over again. My mind had went from a mentally healthy one to a week later screaming that they had messed up and was trying to take my child from me to finish what they hadn't completed the first time. I had the appearance that my life was still the same before the abortion, but not deep inside. I had to go back into the clinic. They guessed that maybe I was having a blood clot, and if not addressed, it would kill me. The assurance indicating that the abortion was harmless and I would feel better during the first visit was no longer present. I know what happens when you walk in the front door, and I know what happens when you walk out the back door. The baby was gone, and so was a part of me. I didn't say a word, and the whole battle was in my mind and would be for many, many years to come until someone could help me sift through the self-sabotaging behaviors that I had now taken on with my low self-esteem. All the questions I had for the staff doctors when I'd went in, the answers that I didn't get, the encouragement to continue on were all lingering there. My husband and I grew apart. We ended up divorcing. And at the time, I had no way of knowing I would spend decades with the subconscious fear that my children would be taken away from me as a punishment for what I'd done. I had no way of knowing that the person who was usually an optimistic was experiencing depression and denial. I stayed so busy and remained that way for so many years to inside my mind and in my heart. And I was among the lucky ones.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. The choice closed one door, but opened another door that impacted my ability to lead an emotionally healthy life, actually emotionally disabled me. I was not alone. This is a silent epidemic being created. Most women have no way of knowing what awaits them on the other side. To call abortion a right is an injustice to women. To date, I have met no one that brags about their choice. Abortion leaves a long-lasting impact on a society, mental illness, depression, and so many other destructive behaviors that result are a horrible price for a woman in society to have to pay, all for a choice that some people want to enshrine into a law as a right. For these reasons, I ask that you allow this amendment to be put on the ballot to be voted for by the people of Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and for your testimony today.
Thank you.
With that, we will turn to written proponents who have submitted testimony. They are Dr. Jeff Collier, former Kansas governor, Jeff Cheney, Chief Deputy Attorney General, Katie Adkins, private citizen, Kathleen Ahern, an RN and citizen, Dr. Amy Curry, citizen, Dr. Lisa Gilbert, Ascension Via Christi, Aaron Keeley, Dawn King, also of Ascension Via Christi, Dr. Stacy Peterson, and Molly Price. Members of the committee, you should have that written testimony in your email digitally. So then we will now turn to oral opponent conferees, and we will start with and welcome to committee Nancy Lusk, former Kansas House of Representative. I'm sorry, I was looking for further testimony, but let's stop for a moment. Representative, sorry about that. And let's do 10 minutes of questions. So we'll open up the floor for questions from committee. Do we have any questions for any of the proponents from committee? Yes, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question for Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, you described the Family Policy Alliance as one that, quote, advocates for policies that strengthen families. Can you describe the programs your organization supports that would increase access to prenatal care, reduce food insecurity, provide quality, affordable health care, safe, affordable child care for working parents, paid parental leave, good early childhood education programs, and strong K-12 schools? Because I would love to work together on those issues. Thank you.
Is that a question?
The question was, can you describe the program your organization supports affecting the issues that I listed? Because you testified that, quote, your organization, quote, advocates for policies that strengthen families. What I described were policies that I believe would strengthen Kansas families. Can you describe your organization's support for those programs and ways we might be able to work together on those issues?
Please introduce yourself for the benefit of those listening. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Brittany Jones with the Family Policy Alliance. Thank you, Senator Corson. I'm sorry I did not quite understand what you were looking for me. We are an advocacy organization, so we work with allies across the country and in Kansas to promote the issues of life, religious freedom, school choice, educational freedom, and many other policies to help families. And though we might disagree on exactly how we support those things, that is what our organization works on.
You don't advocate for any of the policies that I listed, correct?
I do advocate for educational choice and educational freedom and parental rights, which I think might fall into the strengthening K through 12 education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is for, well, I've got two, actually. One would be for Ms. Alvey. Ms. Alvey, I appreciate you being here today, and thank you. Thank all of you, let me say, Madam Chair, for it's most compelling, the testimony that we've heard from everyone. But I was struck by your assertion, ma'am, that a woman does not have a right to make the decision, this personal decision regarding abortion. So I guess my question is, if the woman doesn't have a right to make the decision as to what occurs with her own body, well, who do you think should be making the decisions about whether or not to have a family or start a family or any other private medical decision? Who should the woman then trust, or who should we entrust to make the decision for women if we shouldn't entrust her to have that right?
I believe that women
Please identify
and...
yourself and where you're from.
Sorry?
Thank you.
What's that?
Please identify your name, please, and where you're from.
I'm Anne Marie Alvey, and I work with Project Rachel and Project Joseph, which is a post-abortive healing ministry. In terms of right, I believe in the right to life, and that life begins at conception. And so I do believe that the laws should cover that. I do, in the world that we live in, it's messy, and that doesn't happen. And so, you know, when I brought up in my testimony about women not having a right to choose, like I said, 64% of women are coerced into abortion, and that can be manipulation to outright violence. So even if we were to say women have this right, many women are deprived of it in their personal lives with the people surrounding them because they're not supported. I don't know if that is answering your question.
It does, Madam Chair. Ms. Alvey, I guess it looks to a philosophical difference in terms of how rights inure to men and to women and to people in our society. Then to just ask a little closer to that. You know, Ms. Alvey, that many, and we've even heard from a conferee today, that often pregnancies come about through rape and incest even, and it's a concern. Would you feel that this inures then to an exception in these cases if a woman or a girl is raped or the victim of incest, that she could not have that exception to having a healthy...
Again, I'm speaking, you know, what my personal feelings would be, but I would want to get that person psychological help because of the trauma. And I do believe that abortion is also traumatic, and it would be adding trauma onto trauma. And I have heard, you know, cases of rape victims who have kept the baby. There are those who don't, but there are those who do, and they are grateful for that child. And they're grateful that they did not get rid of that child because of the event that occurred to them. It's a horrible way to conceive a child in an act of violence, but I also believe that abortion is extremely traumatic, and adding that trauma onto another trauma wrecks the woman psychologically. And I would advocate for mental health services to help that person deal with the initial trauma that they had.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Alvey, for that response. Again, there's a philosophical desire.
Yeah.
And we won't have that debate here. I appreciate you being here as a conferee. I'm from Kansas City, Kansas,
Okay.
as you know. But I would say I don't know if it furthers societal's goals or the woman's own personal trauma to be reminded of a rape or of incestuous pregnancy by watching the face or seeing the face of her rapist
I'll remind the senator that we have limited time. If you could get to your two questions.
Thank you, and I do have another conferee, Madam Chair. to be continued. Thank you, Ms. Alvey. And if I can, Madam Chair, Dr. Powers, very briefly. Dr. Powers, I was just wondering, because she's in this field, we have a problem with first trimester, especially prenatal care, Madam Chair. And I don't know if Dr. Powers or Dr. Scrafford would opine what we can do or how we could address the fact that many women, especially in my community, don't have access to first trimester prenatal care. And so how would they see that that we address that as well, Madam Chair? Either one of them, that if they're still with us.
Sure. Do we have Dr. Scrafford or Dr. Powers still on WebEx to answer the question?
Hey, sorry, this is Dr. Scrafford. Sorry, I wasn't sure who the question was for.
Go ahead. Thank you.
And so just so I can understand the question, it was how we can increase better access to prenatal care in the first trimester. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think there are a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know that any of them necessarily bear direct bearing on this amendment, but I think increasing access to insurance, I think that's one of the main reasons people don't access prenatal care in the first trimester is lack of insurance. I think also increasing public awareness of public programs that make prenatal care accessible. There are a lot of times that people don't access prenatal care, not understanding the availability of public programs that would make it available to them if they pursued it. I think also broadening the net of providers in our communities. If, for example, greater employment of like certified nurse midwives has been shown in a few studies to increase access to prenatal care. I know definitely in Wichita and other parts of Kansas, that's an underutilized resource that in several studies has shown improved access to care. Those are a few things that come to mind to me.
I thank Dr. Scrafford for that answer, Madam Chair. I know it does broaden the scope of what we're narrowly on today, but these are some of the concerns that are ancillary, certainly to me, when we look at limiting a woman's right to make personal decisions.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. I'm going to direct one question to Maria Canjani, if she would be available to answer questions. And while you approach the podium, thank you again for appearing publicly to state your testimony. Appreciate that. Appreciate the testimony of all the conferees today who shared their stories and their information. My question is, Kansas currently has in statute the right to know about the procedure and what's involved, and parental notification and consent. And in your particular case, how would some of those laws have changed where you are today, if you will, and where you were when you were going through the procedure? And if you could limit your answer in time, that would be helpful. Thank you. Please state your name again.
Maria Canjani, nurse practitioner. I am thinking your question was if those laws were in place at that time for me. I think obviously it's hard to say what would have changed. You know, you can't go back and do that. But what I know now, and knowing as a provider, informed consent is so important, and knowing all of your options, and more so treating the person as a holistic person. You know, they're not just there as a transaction, but they're there as a person that has gone through something, whether through just a single relationship or a rape or through multiple partners, whatever the situation or pregnancy would be. Having those in place definitely allows a woman, because you're in crisis, you don't know. You're just going to somebody, and if you have a group of people who will guide you just to one thing, you're just gonna do that. So I think in crisis, we really need to nurture these women and carry them and say, these are your options. There is hope, there is opportunity.
Thank you. And with that, we're out of time for the questions for the proponents, so we will turn to the oral opponent testimony today and reintroduce Representative Nancy Lusk, former Kansas House of Representative, who I had the privileged to serve with last session. So thank you and welcome to committee.
Excuse me.
4 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Warren and the committee. Thank you for this opportunity. First, I will tell you that I am a believing and church-going Christian, and I do not believe that full personhood can be assigned at the time of conception or soon after, in part because no one knows for certain when the soul enters the fetal body. I acknowledge my belief is different from many Christians, but I've read the same Bible, studied scripture, and reached a different conclusion. And I am not alone. There are people of other faiths and other Christians who have a variety of beliefs as to when life officially begins. And our beliefs are as sincerely held and legitimate as any other. Our legal standard of reasonable doubt in the U.S., by that, religious beliefs cannot make the determination of when a zygote becomes a full legal entity. Before imposing restrictions to take away reproductive choice and deny a woman the ability to choose critical health care, government is responsible to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that life is taken and the crime of murder is committed with an abortion. Some pro-life people argue that they can meet the standard of reasonable doubt because they claim scientific proof exists to support their belief that individual personhood begins at conception or soon after. On pages 14 through 18, I have outlined my reasoning of why I find their claim of scientific proof does not hold up under logical scrutiny. The proposed amendment does not include an exception for the right to save the life of the mother, excuse me. The right of self-defense for pregnant women in medical emergencies must be protected. Pregnancy is not a risk-free event. Women have died when denied an abortion. Abortions in the second half of pregnancies are very rare, less than 1.5%, but they can be needed to save a woman's life. There is great reasonable doubt as to when and if a fetus qualifies for personhood. But here is what we do know. We know with certainty that a woman is a person. When an issue falls into as many unknowns as this, the power to decide should be left with the individual instead of allowing government to impose its will. If this amendment passes, and with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, it opens up the door to criminalize.
Minute remaining.
1
minute remaining.
Okay. It will open up the door to criminalize women who are in emergent. Sorry. Excuse me. I'll start again. It will open up the door to criminalize procedures that are needed to save women who are in late stages of pregnancy, where their babies will not survive, but where their life is threatened. And I think that's very important. I'll leave it at that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate that. Next, we have Sandy Brown from Kansas Abortion Fund. Welcome to committee. Please make sure you introduce yourself, and we'll have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Warner. Thank you, committee folks, for having me here today. My name is Sandy Brown, and I am the president of the Kansas Abortion Fund. And I'm here today to urge members of this committee to vote no on this constitutional amendment that denies the right to reproductive freedom in the Kansas Constitution. So the Kansas Abortion Fund is a nonprofit that has provided financial support to over 4,700 Kansans to obtain abortion services for the past 20 years. 4,700. And as an affiliate of the National Network of Abortion Funds, we proudly serve and fiercely advocate for our reproductive rights. Throughout history of service to Kansans, we have never, ever turned down a person in need. So over the past 2 years alone, we have funded 755 women who were otherwise unable to afford their abortions. 755 women who couldn't get their abortions paid for even partially by health insurance or Medicaid. 755 people who were only able to exercise the right over their own bodies because they obtained financial assistance. Kansans who simply did not have the cash for the $700 first trimester abortion after paying the rent, the utilities, and feeding and clothing their kids. We've watched the government erode our access to reproductive health care over the past decades. The heaviest attack has been on Kansans in crisis who don't have anywhere near the financial means to pay for an abortion, let alone emergency contraception. With only 4 clinics in Kansas, pregnant people often have to travel long distances to obtain medical care, struggle to find child care while away, miss work, and lose salary. These factors, along with the overarching stress and stigma of abortion, make an already difficult situation much more trying and potentially impossible without prompt assistance. A very heavy burden for anybody to bear alone. Marginalized Kansans and their families would be hit hardest if this constitutional amendment passes. Currently, it's lower income folks and often people of color who frequently cannot afford what is theoretically and legally a right guaranteed for all, to all. Given the looming prospect of further weakening Roe v. Wade, including reversal or remanding back to the states, this proposed constitutional amendment could end abortion access entirely for Kansans you serve, and you know it would. We will not allow such a future to unfold. A long and painful history shows that women will always find a way to terminate their unwanted pregnancies, despite the enormous personal risks involved.
Remaining.
But if we must ensure that abortion remains safe, legal, and accessible. Decisions about whether to end a pregnancy are deeply personal and rightfully belong to the individual person in consultation with her healthcare team and family, not solely in the hands of politicians in Topeka. Let's be clear, Kansans deserve a right to make their own personal private medical decisions without legislator interference. Our individual constitutional right to make decisions concerning our bodies, our health, and our futures should never be subject to a vote by legislators with political agendas. Ad abortion per aspera.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, for your testimony and appearing before the committee. Next, we have Julie Burkhart from Trust Women Foundation.
I dropped my hearing aid. Sorry.
Okay. Do you see it? All right, you got it? Very good. And I believe we have Ms. Burkhart appearing by WebEx. Are you there, Ms. Burkhart? Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Warren and members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to SCR 1602 this afternoon. My name is Julie Burkhart, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trust Women. We are the only provider of procedural and medication abortion services outside of the Kansas City area. 50% of our patient population comes from outside of Sedgwick County. So therefore, we serve people from all across the state of Kansas. Kansas politicians who crafted this bill want to substitute the legislature's will for a woman's right to decide, in consultation with her family, her faith, and her doctor, whether or not she has an abortion. It's distressing that legislators want to put Kansas women's rights and health up for a vote of the people. Let's make no mistake about this measure. It's the first step in passing an all-out ban on abortion in Kansas. And this is where politicians are clearly out of step with the voters in this state. One statistic that I think is important to highlight here is that 70%, and this is higher than the national average, of women who come into our clinics are already moms. And what I hear time and time again is that women are coming in to have an abortion procedure because they want to be good mothers and they want to be able to provide the best for their children. We have canvassed door to door across Kansas in urban neighborhoods and in rural communities, talking to people and your constituents about reproductive health care. And one common thread, no matter where we are, whether it's urban or rural, is that we are hearing people's abortion stories right there on their doorsteps. The reality is that abortion touches the lives of all people. At least 1 in 4 women, by the time that they're in their mid-40s, will have had an abortion. So therefore, it's safe to assume that we know women who have had abortions. It's just that no one is talking about it. How can a proposal to amend the Constitution of the state of Kansas be helpful to the citizens of this state when it clearly seeks to deny women the right to make their own decisions about their health care? This amendment would clearly pit the state against women. This amendment would put the health of Kansas women in danger. Do we really want the state to get into the business of putting women in harm's way? Do we want the state to get into the business of jeopardizing the well-being of our moms, our daughters, our sisters, and our friends? I know I certainly do not. So I would encourage you all to please consider the real consequences of this proposed amendment on the lives of women. Lastly,
1 minute remaining.
Lastly, the legislature could affirm the right to life by enacting these following policies. Expand Medicaid. We have 165,000 people right now today who could benefit. Work to eradicate maternal and infant mortality and change inequitable policies. And I know that there's a bill that was just introduced. Work to ensure that all forms of contraception are widely available. The truth is that even if politicians interfere with women's health care, it will not erase abortion from the fabric of society, whether it's legal or illegal. And thank you so much. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Burkhart. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for appearing before committee today. Next, we will hear from Leslie Butch, who it looks like is appearing by WebEx. Are you ready to proceed? Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Leslie Bush, and I'm a resident of Kansas City, Kansas. I implore you to vote no on SCR 1602 and protect Kansans' right to bodily autonomy. After last week's attempted coup at the nation's capital, I feel even more confident that it is necessary to intervene when an extremist few work to undermine the will of the majority. SCR 1602 is an additional example of an extreme, unpopular attempt to make decisions against the interests of the majority. This amendment does not reflect the wishes of Kansans. Indeed, most Kansans at 54% support access to abortion. I am one of those Kansans. I've lived in Kansas all my life. I am a social worker and a community organizer. These restrictive anti-abortion amendments remind me of my work as an advocate for domestic violence survivors. When I worked at a shelter, I fought alongside survivors of intimate partner violence who were seeking safety and justice. I heard of abusers who worked to sabotage their victims' employment, housing, or parenting. I also learned about the commonality of reproductive coercion. In the field of domestic violence, We learn how abusers work to maintain power and control over their victim. Sometimes this power and control is maintained through emotional or physical violence, and reproductive coercion is another of these tools. Reproductive coercion is the act of controlling an individual's reproductive health choices, such as coercing a partner to have sex without protection or denying access to birth control. This anti-abortion amendment is state-sanctioned reproductive coercion. By undermining the Kansas Supreme Court of 2019 and proposing this amendment, the Kansas Legislature is attempting to assert control over the reproductive decisions of millions of Kansans without their consent. I know this amendment is not an abortion ban in its current iteration, but I also know that those that crafted this amendment have made it crystal clear that banning abortion outright is their ultimate goal, and the Kansas Constitution is just the first obstacle in their way. They will not stop until abortion is illegal, putting millions of people who can become pregnant, including me, in bodily danger. Please vote no on SCR 1602. Voting no means standing with your constituents who elected you to represent their voices. It means standing for reproductive freedom so that people like me who can become pregnant have the ability to make decisions that are best for our families without the government getting in the way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for appearing before committee today. Next, we have Dr. Valerie French, who is also appearing by WebEx. If you'll introduce yourself, please, and welcome to committee. I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. We have next Dr. Valerie French. Dr. French, I'm being told your mic where you're sitting needs to be unmuted so we can hear you. And also, if you're able to put yourself on video, right now we don't have any video, it looks like, but you are muted at your computer. And we're still showing as you are muted at your computer. If you can unmute your microphone, we'll be able to hear you. We can't hear you right now. So we'll give you a minute to see if you can unmute your microphone where you sit at your computer. We show that Dr. French is still in the WebEx meeting, but just muted at her computer. Okay. Okay, great. We're trying to work that out. Okay, great. She's joining on another device so we can hear her and see her. Thanks for bearing with us as we work with the technology to get everybody heard today. Would it be helpful to move to the next conferee while Dr. French is able to work with the technology? Can we do that? If we could go then to Margaret Kramer. There we go. Looks like we have Dr. French on WebEx in the committee room. So we'll proceed then with Dr. Valerie French. If you could introduce yourself and welcome to committee. 4 minutes. Go ahead.
I so sincerely apologize. Or can you all hear me now?
We can, yes. Thank you. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Valerie French, who I'd like to think is an exceptional doctor and apparently not very good at technology. I do appreciate your patience. I'm a board certified obstetrician gynecologist who practices in Kansas City, and I have been a physician for over 11 years. In that time, I've encountered hundreds of women who have sought an abortion. Each woman has her own story and her own reasons. I wrote about some of these women in my written testimony, but I wanted to take a moment to share a few of their stories now. I'll call my first patient Beth. She works as a nurse at my hospital, and she has 3 children. After the birth of her last child, she and her husband knew that they had completed their family, and Beth had a tubal ligation to prevent future pregnancies. At the age of 43, when her youngest child was 8 years old, Beth went to the emergency department because she felt tired and her belly hurt. In the emergency department, she discovered that she was pregnant. She asked, "How could this happen?" over and over. "How could this happen to me? I did everything right," she said. Beth didn't feel that she could carry another pregnancy at her age and still care for the children that she had. She decided to have an abortion, and I trust that she did the right thing for herself and her family. I'll describe another woman, Susanna, I'll call her, a few months ago. She was pregnant with her 4th pregnancy, and I learned about her previous 3 pregnancies. With her first pregnancy, Susanna and her husband welcomed a baby girl to their family, but their baby got very sick very fast. After dozens of doctors and hours of agony, their baby girl died at 9 days old. Susanna explained that she and her husband were carriers of a rare genetic condition that affects the kidneys. They have a 1 in 4 chance of having a baby with the disease, which is often fatal. Susanna and her husband grieved the loss of their daughter. With early testing, they learned in their 2nd pregnancy that their son was not affected by the disease and gave birth to him and celebrated the growth of their family. A few years later, Susanna and her husband wanted to grow their family more, but early genetic testing found that Susanna's 3rd pregnancy was also affected by the condition. After reviewing her diagnosis, Susanna and her husband decided to end the pregnancy. They said they couldn't endure the pain they had experienced losing their daughter at 9 days old. Now, carrying her 4th pregnancy, Susanna knew that abortion had been the right decision for her. She asked about genetic testing for this current pregnancy so that she could make the best decision for herself and her family. Lastly, I'd like to share one more story about a woman who I will call Tammy. Tammy woke up on an average Thursday and noticed some bleeding. She was scared because she was 17 weeks pregnant. She went straight to the hospital, but by the time that she got there, her bleeding had increased. Tammy's blood pressure had started to drop because she had lost so much blood. You see, Tammy's placenta covered the opening to the uterus. That's called a placenta previa. Her doctor started a blood transfusion right away, but could tell that the only way to stop the bleeding was to remove the pregnancy. The team talked with Tammy, who agreed to the procedure, a dilation and evacuation, which is an abortion. Tammy's bleeding
1 minute remaining.
Tammy's bleeding stopped with the procedure. She stayed in the intensive care unit to recover. The next day, she grieved the loss of her pregnancy, but was thankful to be alive. Tammy's abortion saved her life. As a physician, I have seen how abortion is a part of healthcare. I support my patients and I trust their decisions. I hope that safe, legal, and very importantly, accessible abortion remains in Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony, and when the time is right, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. French. Thank you for hanging in there with the technology too. So we got it eventually. Next we have Margaret Kramer, who is appearing by WebEx. If you'll please introduce yourself and
Hi.
Just a moment, please. Not yet. We've got to switch the camera. Hold on. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Margaret Kramer.
I'm from Ms. Kramer, Oh, there we go. Yes, please, sorry, introduce yourself. Welcome to committee, and you've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Margaret Kramer, and I am from Lecanton, Kansas. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to oppose HCR 500. Should government take away the freedom to make personal and private life choices? No one can predict the far-reaching effects of the current pandemic, nor can anyone predict whether a hotter, drier planet with less water may be on the horizon, possibly resulting in food shortages. What if the government decides there are too many people? The same government that can prohibit women from having abortions can also force them to have abortions. This happened in China, and as the last few weeks have proven, we can no longer state with certainty that something could never happen in the United States. Further, regardless of one's beliefs regarding the religious question of when the soul enters the body, we live in a pluralistic society of many different religious persuasions. The First Amendment states that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, end of quote. If you want other people to respect your religious convictions, please tolerate theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kumar. Thank you for your testimony and for appearing in committee today. Next, we have Mallory Lanier, Medical Students for Choice. Thank you, Ms. Lanier, for appearing today for your testimony, and welcome to committee. You've got 4 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Mallory Lanier, and I am a second-year medical student at a 4-year allopathic medical school in Kansas City, Kansas. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from KU and will complete my Doctorate of Medicine in 2023. Upon completion of my training, I hope to serve as a primary care provider in an underserved area. As a future physician of Kansas, I find it necessary to voice my concern regarding this proposed constitutional amendment that would threaten a woman's right to personal autonomy. In medical school, we learn that socioeconomic determinants truly impact one's health, including but not limited to poverty, education, and access to healthcare. In addition to completing my studies, I also serve as co-president of Medical Students for Choice. Through this group, I have had the opportunity to know many great Kansas physicians and medical student colleagues. A peer of mine told me this story that I would like to share with you. As a content warning, this story talks about sexual violence and domestic violence. I want to tell you about a patient who I'll call Christina. She was raped very early in her pregnancy by her uncle. Then her husband, who did not believe that she did not solicit the sex, proceeded to severely beat and strangle her. She felt extremely unsafe in her home, and without any money to leave him, she wasn't sure that she was going to survive. My colleague watched the physician she was training under counsel the patient in a non-coercive and supportive manner. Christina was counseled on all of the options she had for her pregnancy, including abortion. She was given domestic violence resources and referred to social services for further help. A Kansas resident like Christina is an example of the woman who would be hurt the most by this constitutional amendment. If Kansas were to ever ban abortion, financially privileged women will still be able to travel out of state and receive the health care they need. Low-income women will not have this option, and as such will be disproportionately affected. The state should not be creating barriers to health care. Instead, we should be making it easier for all Kansans to have access to comprehensive medical care. The state of Kansas is in the midst of a physician shortage, and the need for young, new physicians to practice here is more crucial than ever before. This new constitutional amendment may drive away young physicians like myself from practicing in Kansas because it would prevent me from providing adequate, compassionate care to my patients. Physicians have a unique role in their communities, and I am honored and privileged to receive my medical education in Kansas. I hope that Kansas legislators trust the expertise of physicians working in their state, and I believe that abortion care is health care. Therefore, Kansas legislators should respect the physician-patient relationship and allow people of the state the right to reproductive freedom. This amendment has the potential to dangerously harm women and families, especially those already disenfranchised. As a future healthcare provider of this state, I encourage you to strongly oppose this legislation. Medical decisions should be between a patient and their physician, not the legislator. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lanier. Thank you for appearing in committee and for your testimony today. Next, we have Sarah Moyes. I'm sorry if I didn't state that correctly, from URGE, Unite for Reproductive Justice and Gender Equality, who I believe is appearing by WebEx.
Yes, can you hear me?
Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee, and you've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you to the members of the committee for the opportunity to present my testimony. My name is Sarah Moyes, and I am one of Kansas State organizers for URGE for Reproductive and Gender Equity. My testimony speaks on behalf of the constituents in Kansas from 18 to 30. Today, I firmly ask you to vote against Concurrent Resolution 1602, which attempts to restrict abortion access. The referendum that this type of measure calls for will cause harm to young marginalized communities and is not in line with Kansas values. This is to open the floor to numerous and dangerous restrictions on abortion in the state of Kansas. An identical amendment was passed in Tennessee that the legislators banned abortion. We have every reason to believe the same thing would happen here. Using the state constitution to take basic protections in healthcare away from people, the betrayal of our values and the purpose of our constitution, which is to protect and uphold the rights of Kansans. Supporters of this amendment may try to hide their extreme agenda, but the people of Kansas will not be fooled. In the very near future, there's a protection for rights of abortion. How the Kansas Constitution is only based rights in the whole state. Abortion must remain legal in the state of Kansas. However we may feel about abortion, this is a personal decision that each of us have to make for ourselves. It is not for politicians to create barriers and restrictions that decisions. The constitutional amendment is the first step to banning abortion in Kansas, which directly applies if the Supreme Court decision in 2019. Contrary to what supporters of this bill would claim, abortion is a normal and essential part of the full range of sexual and reproductive health care. The decision, if and when to continue a pregnancy and to become a parent, is a decision that should be made with dignity and respect. The constitutional amendment would do the exact opposite of this by creating the first step to banning abortion in Kansas. Whether a person decides to parent, choose adoption, or have an abortion, we all have to deserve the care we need and we stand the rights of all people to make those decisions for themselves from political interference. Even if you are against people's right to choose, the passing of this resolution will be a threat to democracy itself. We all know that the turnout for Kansas primary elections is much less than the turnout for general elections. If we truly want the voices of Kansas people to be heard, wouldn't we want to hear from as many Kansas voices as possible? To be sure, this amendment would harm young people, people of color, and low-income folks. This constitutional amendment would unquestionably be followed by restrictions that will make abortion less accessible, more expensive, and even for a person who decides to end their pregnancy or a healthcare provider who supports them. As Young People's Reproductive Justice Organization, URGE strongly opposes SC 1602. On behalf of the membership of young people across the state, I urge you to do the right thing and vote no on this harmful constitutional amendment. Don't or anti-abortion special interest groups hijack our legislative process and to deny our basic rights and threaten our health. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify again.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and I apologize I misstated your name. Thank you for your testimony and appearing before committee. Next, we have Dr. May Winchester, who is also appearing by WebEx. So please introduce yourself. Welcome to committee, and you've got 4 minutes. You're not up yet on the camera, so you can wait just a moment. And we will have you on camera as soon as you start introducing yourself. Welcome to committee. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. May Winchester, and I'm a board-certified OBGYN practicing in Kansas City, Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to testify virtually so that I can continue to keep my patients safe during this pandemic. My work focuses solely on maternal fetal medicine, which is the care of sick moms and sick babies. Just this week alone, I have cared for patients with severe liver disease, debilitating cardiac diseases, life-threatening blood disorders, and other maternal complications. This week, I also met a young, kind family who, despite the pain that you'll see, has allowed me to share their story with you today so that their rights might continue to be protected. I will call the parents John and Jane, and they are pregnant with their first child, and they were over the moon. Unfortunately, their baby has Patau syndrome, or trisomy 13. This is a genetic condition associated with severe birth defects and significant intellectual disability. The median life expectancy, if a baby is born alive, is only about 1 week. Because of the abnormal pregnancy itself, maternal complications, including maternal mortality, are also increased when this fetus is affected by trisomy 13. There is no cure for trisomy 13. When I told John and Jane about the diagnosis, they were, of course, heartbroken. Jane sobbed uncontrollably in that body heaving and gut wrenching way that mothers do when they know that no matter what happens, they are going to lose their child. John sat stoically next to his wife, holding her, crying silent tears, and I could tell by the look on his face that he was just beside himself with grief. We talked about all of their options, including abortion. John and Jane face an extremely difficult decision that most people will never, ever have to make. And when my patients are faced with decisions like this, it is my job to provide non-directional counseling, to trust their decision, and to respect their decision. Their choices, including abortion, are currently protected by our state constitution and should remain so. I am so incredibly grateful that all of their choices, including abortion, remain legal in their home state. As a physician, I've always believed that providing comprehensive reproductive health care is not only essential health care, but an honor. No matter who walks through my door or no matter what brings a family to a decision of needing abortion care, I am here to help them receive the care they need. That is my job, the job of a physician. Each and every patient is complex and unique. They cannot be put into a one-size-fits-all box or a one-size-fits-all bill. This legislation threatens the ability of my patients to receive the care that they need and the care that they feel is right for their family. And for some of my patients, this legislation endangers their lives. I oppose any legislation that endangers access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including abortion. Patients should be allowed to make complex decisions that align with their faith, their family needs, and their health without interference from the government and without interference from strangers at a ballot box. Abortion is an incredibly personal decision and should be treated as such.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I'll be available for questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Winchester. Thank you for your testimony and for appearing before committee today. We next have Philip Wood, and he's appearing by WebEx, it appears. So please, welcome to committee, introduce yourself, and you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wilburn and members of the committee. Pleased to speak before you today. I'm rising against the proposed concurrent resolution. I am a professor of psychology at the University of Missouri. I have some very short comments to talk to you about from my status as a researcher and also my personal experience. You've heard a number of people talk about research, and none of the cited research that you've heard so far corresponds at all to what the American Psychological Association presents. I can refer any interested members to the statement on abortion, specifically heading what the science says. Women who are denied an abortion are more likely to experience higher levels of anxiety, lower life satisfaction, and lower self-esteem compared to women who do receive an abortion. Experiencing unwanted pregnancies appears to be strongly associated with poor mental health for women later in life. There's a strong relationship between unwanted pregnancy and interpersonal violence, because frequently women who have and unwanted pregnancy are forced to stay in contact with their violent partners, also putting their children at risk. Unwanted pregnancy is associated with deficits with the child's cognitive, emotional, and social processes. The number of unsafe abortions is likely to increase when policies limit access to reproductive health care. You also get another angle in my testimony because I have a personal story about abortion. My wife and I were trying to have a child. I've submitted that in my written testimony. You can look at it. I've noted that Dr. Scrafford and Dr. Powers mentioned in vitro surgeries for fetuses now. We were diagnosed with twins, and despite all of the efforts, they suffered from twin-twin transfusion syndrome. The genetically healthy children would not survive. We went to Dr. Pinheiro in Miami Women's and Children's in order to have one of the fetuses' umbilical cords tied off so that the other one could survive. When we got there, Dr. Pinheiro informed us that this was not possible and told us to go to have an abortion somewhere. And we said, where? And he said, well, I don't know. This is a Catholic institution. We don't keep track of these things. We were able to, after numerous delays, have the abortion done by the late Dr. George Chiller in his clinic. I'd like to comment about Ms. Pfeiffer's comments about the interior of the clinic. It was clean and a wonderful supportive staff. The walls were covered in letters of thank you to Dr. Chiller for the assistance that he had provided to women when they really needed help. The laws that are proposed are not very well written because they don't take into account multiple fetuses and also the destruction of fertilized embryos in the process of fertility treatments. I think that, the proposals that we have heard, the so-called testimony of individual lives, which are very good, are not reflective of the entire experience going on. I see I'm at time. I thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee, and I will stay around for questions. Thank you.
I was going to notify you had 1 minute remaining, but if your testimony
That's
is
fine.
concluded. Okay, all right, thank you. That concludes the opponent oral testimony. Opponent written testimony has been submitted by the following: Lindsey Vaughn, Kansas House of Representatives; Annalise Apala Flaherty; Jennifer Ansell; Glenn Armbruster; Vicki Arnett; Dr. Emily Bovers Solverson; Christy Berghart; Margaret Conroe; Dwayne Apala Flattery; Devin Buckler Mullins; Gabriella Geller of the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Council; Reverend Allie Haynes; Nadine Johnson, American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas; Dr. Joy Costin; Margaret Kowalowski Reynolds; Dr. Juliet Marsh; Dr. Christina Bourne et al., Physicians for Trust Women Foundation; Dr. Angela Martin; Misha Buckler Mullins; Megan McQuinn; Jay Moyer; Lynn Paltrow, National Association for Pregnant Women; Michael Papa, Mainstream Coalition; Jamie Reaver, Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice; Pamela Richardson; Elizabeth Smith, Center for Reproductive Rights; Rachel Sweet, Planned Parenthood; and Teresa Woody, the Woody Law Firm. Having heard from our opponents who have appeared to give oral testimony, we'll open it up for questions. Do we have any questions from committee members? Yes, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question for Dr. French.
Happy to take your question.
Dr. French, I appreciated you sharing with the committee some of your experiences with your patients. Would I be accurate in saying, in describing the decisions made by your patients as being deeply personal?
Yes, I think that's a very accurate description.
Sorry, if you could please identify yourself before you speak and where you're from. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Valerie French. I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist in Wyandotte County. And yes, I think the decision to have an abortion is a deeply personal one.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is for Ms. Sandy Brown. Sandy Brown with Kansas Abortion Fund. She's with us. And while you're coming up, thank you for your testimony. In fact, I'd like to thank all of the conferees for the testimony, both those that are with us and those that are virtual, Madam Chair. Just compelling on both sides of this issue, and very well presented, especially considering our technology and those in person, what we're dealing with. Ms. Brown, you testified that, and for me, this big issue comes down to access. Let me just put my card on the table. The access of Kansas women to abortion. You testified is about $700 in the first trimester.
Please identify yourself, and then you can
Yes,
answer. Thank you.
my name is Sandy Brown, and I'm president of the Kansas Abortion Fund. Yes, and it's approximately $700. Of course, that will vary from clinic to clinic.
And thank you. And I live in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and I certainly know that there are clinics available in Missouri. Do you know if we vary much between states right now, between Kansas and Missouri, or approximately what that might be on the Missouri side?
For the cost of a first
For
trimester?
first, and I'd also like to know a second trimester, if you happen to know that. If you don't, I understand.
You know, I don't, but I could defer to a colleague who would have that answer. Probably Rachel Sweets from Planned Parenthood would know. Would you like to defer that question to her?
Yes, ma'am, and for the sake of expediency, my follow-up would be implementing some of these policies, because we've heard testimony, and the concern that many people have, certainly I do, is what the cost of unlicensed care is. I will say, in full disclosure, I've assisted women in crisis to try and raise that $700 on many occasions. And I'm pleased to know that there's a supplemental fund that helps, because it is a burden on poor women, especially who are in crisis pregnancies. But I also know that there are clinics that are not licensed, that are performing procedures that many consider dangerous, and they are a fraction of $700 for the first trimester, and they're operating today in our state. So my question for you and whomever you defer to is who or what would be the shift, if you will, to another, you referenced Ms. Sweet with Planned Parenthood. I'm just trying to provide for the committee and for the Senate during this deliberation of the burden of cost and accessibility that implementing these additional measures might provide. I know it's a run-on question, but...
So the question being, the cost is of course a burden, and that we are able to fill the gap. We are definitely able to fill the gap. And although to your statement about other clinics providing abortion care that is less than optimal in the state of Kansas, I'm not aware of that. I know that there are 4 clinics in Kansas, 2 in Overland Park and 2 in Wichita, and I'm not aware of those other clinics of which you speak.
I understand. No, there are. It's an individual or individuals that perform unlicensed, unregulated abortions because people cannot afford to have or to afford a licensed, regulated clinic where it can be safely performed at $700 in the first trimester in, as you're saying, Kansas City, Kansas. And my question is, if Missouri is similar in a first trimester, and then what do those costs, or what are they roughly for second trimester? Proceed.
I would imagine that it would also be about the same cost, although I know that there is greater limitation in Missouri than in Kansas. But there is also a Missouri abortion fund. And as you mentioned, the abortion funds throughout the country have stepped up because Medicaid is not available, especially as we know in Kansas, to cover the procedure, as is insurance plans. So, you know, we fill in that gap, and we're ready to we are already taking that task on.
All right, and I don't want to put her on the spot. You did reference her. I do know that she's here. I didn't know if she would want to weigh in on that as well. If not, certainly fine. She's not even listed on the
thank you so much for
if you'll allow,
question.
Madam Chair.
It's not usually the practice of our committee to allow other conferees to speak who haven't prior submitted any oral or written testimony, but because Rachel Sweet has submitted some written testimony, we will allow the deferral for her to answer the question. So please introduce yourself. Welcome to committee.
Thank you,
and go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my name is Rachel Sweet. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Organizing for Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes, and I was supposed to be an in-person conferee today, so I'm not sure where the miscommunication happened, but our hearing is running long, so I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have. But
I apologize, and with the yeah, it's under written, so I apologize. If you would like, with the committee's indulgence, we'll go ahead and have you have your 4 minutes of oral testimony with the indulgence of the committee and those listening online. I apologize, we're running a little bit late, and apologize for the wrong categorization there on the list. But
okay.
Please introduce yourself and 4 minutes, please. Thank you. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair and members of the committee, once again, my name is Rachel Sweet. I am the Regional Director of Public Policy and Organizing for Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes, which is the advocacy and political arm of Planned Parenthood in Kansas. And we are strongly opposed to SCR 1602, as this legislation aims to remove protections for reproductive rights from the Kansas Constitution. Proponents of this bill have long downplayed the concerns shared by opposing conferees and by many Kansans that this constitutional amendment will lead to a ban on abortion. We are not fear-mongering or misrepresenting the facts. We're concerned because we can see the writing on the wall. In recent years, numerous states in the Midwest and South have passed laws banning abortion at as early as 6 weeks, which is before many people even know they are pregnant, all with one goal in mind: bringing a case before the U.S. Supreme Court that will overturn Roe versus Wade. And with our nation's highest court stacked firmly against reproductive rights, their dream is likely to become a reality. Even with Roe in place, states like Kansas have done virtually everything in their power to chip away at abortion access and reproductive rights. In our state, doctors who provide abortion care and the patients who seek it must navigate a complicated web of nearly 24 medically unnecessary restrictions. These laws do nothing to improve patient care. Their intent is simply to make it harder to get an abortion. Abortion is a safe and common medical procedure, and it should be treated as such. The Hodges and Nauser decision leaves ample room for the legislature to regulate abortion as it would any other type of health care. If that is the legislature's intent, no constitutional amendment is required. What this amendment would do is make it possible for Kansas to set even more restrictions on the right to abortion, with no regard for whether a woman has been raped, her health, or if she has been a victim of incest. When Roe falls or is eroded beyond our recognition, there will be no legal right to abortion in the state of Kansas if this amendment is passed. Kansas has two paths before us. We can either be a state where abortion remains safe and legal, or a state where it isn't. This constitutional amendment sends us down the latter path, and the results will be disastrous. Even if we don't agree on abortion, it is better that each person can make their own medical decisions in consultation with their family, their faith, and their doctor. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sweet. We'll get back to the questioning then, if you wanted to ask the conferee. Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Ms. Sweet. So my question was, and certainly first full disclosure, 30 years ago, as a pro-choice Republican, and I was on the board of Planned Parenthood of Greater Kansas City, is what it was called, and well before your time in your service there, ma'am, with Patty Browse, who the clinic is named for now. And I used to assist walking very nervous clients, patients who were coming in past the jeering, leering crowds, and they were fingering $200 for a first trimester, often that they had hard come by to get.
Question, Senator Haley.
The question was, Madam Chair, and it is today, at that time, raising $200 was a struggle. It's been testified here today that the same procedure 30 years later is about $700. What are the costs of a first trimester in Missouri and second trimester procedures, if you would, if you know offhand, and how does that compare with what they are in Kansas?
Sure. So I think Missouri is an interesting situation because there's currently only one health center in the state of Missouri.
Sorry, can you state your name and introduce where you're from? Thank you.
I apologize. Hi, Rachel Sweet, Planned Parenthood, Great Plains Votes. And Missouri is in a bit of a unique situation because there's currently only one health center that is providing abortion care, and it is located in St. Louis. So it's not a part of our affiliate. Our health centers in Missouri are not providing abortion services right now because their state legislature has made it incredibly onerous to provide care in any way that is possible. So they have been unsuccessful in their attempts to shut down the sole remaining abortion providing facility in the state. And right now, I believe that facility is only providing medication abortion services, but I'd be happy to follow up and get you some additional information since it's not one of our health centers at Planned Parenthood Great Plains. I don't want to misquote what they're doing at the moment or who they're able to see.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot.
No, it's okay.
I'm glad that you were able to be an oral conferee for us today, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing that. Sorry about the confusion.
Oh, sure.
Appreciate the opportunity.
I apologize for the confusion as well. Glad you said something. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I have a couple for you, Ms. Sweet. And I'll just, they're pretty short, I think. The first is there's several laws in Kansas that preserve safeguards for women who are obtaining this procedure. Does the organization that you represent, Planned Parenthood, does it support the law in Kansas that's known as right to know, a woman's right to know who the doctor is that's performing the procedure and what the possible complications are? Does your organization support that law?
We don't support the Women's Right to Know Act, no, because it contains medically inaccurate and misleading information. I know that when the Women's Right to Know Act was originally passed, it required doctors to tell their patients that abortion leads to increased incidences of breast cancer, which is not true. It also requires doctors to substitute their own medical judgment for a state-created script that is related to their patient's care. Doctors do informed consent with or without laws like the Women's Right to Know Act. That is part of their job as physicians, is to provide informed consent to their patients. So the Women's Right to Know Act substitutes what the legislature thinks patients should know for what their doctors know that their patients need to know to make a decision about their course of health care.
Thank you. Does your organization support parental notification and consent for minor girls who are seeking an abortion procedure?
I think parental consent is really tricky, I'll be honest. We absolutely think that a trusted adult should be involved in someone's decision like that, especially for someone who is a young teenager. However, for some teens, telling their parents that they are facing an unattended pregnancy can put their life at risk, can put their well-being in jeopardy. And we know because teens who cannot get that parental consent or who are not in a safe living situation have to go before a judge to get a judicial bypass. So we are subjecting a teen who is in a vulnerable situation, facing a really tough life decision. They now have to go through essentially the criminal justice system to get access to health care. And that is a problem.
Was that a no, that your group doesn't support the law in Kansas regarding parental notification for minors?
There there are issues with the law, especially because it is a two-parental consent, which is pretty extreme in terms of other laws in the country. Most states have one parental consent, not a mandatory consent from both parents of a minor.
Just a couple more questions, if you would. Did your organization, when the law in Kansas was created prohibiting taxpayer funding of abortion, did your organization support that law or it did not?
I certainly wasn't here when that was the case. So can you give me a specific statute? I can hold on a second. Certainly look up some of our historical files.
Well, I don't have the exact statute number, but what is your organization's position on the state's taxpayer-funded abortion ban that made law in 2013?
I don't know that we have a position. There's federal policies that do not allow taxpayer funding for abortion, except in cases of rape, incest, or when a patient's life is in danger.
Okay. So let me ask you, would your organization be okay with taxpayer-funded abortion in Kansas?
I think that's a really misleading way to phrase using Medicaid funding to cover abortion services. I don't necessarily know that we think that poor women should be subjected to a different way to access health care because they are low income.
Did your organization have a stance on clinic licensing standards that were passed in Kansas?
Not that I'm aware of now. Again, I would have to look at some of our historical files for things that predate my tenure with the organization.
Well, currently there are licensure requirements in Kansas law currently. So you, as the representative of Planned Parenthood today, are you able to state whether your organization supports licensing of clinics that perform this procedure? Like, it's got to be a physician that performs the procedure, or it has to be clean instruments, or the clinic would be subject to inspection, those things to keep it a clean, sterile environment for the procedure. Does your organization support those types of safeguards for women?
So Planned Parenthood's medical standards and guidelines require an extremely high standard of care. So
I'm talking about laws in Kansas. Does your organization support those?
It's my understanding that some of those statutes around the licensure process are enjoined because they were seen to present an undue burden because they singled out abortion providers to be regulated in a way that was inconsistent with other types of healthcare of similar complexity and risk.
So that may be the case, I'm not sure, but would your organization then oppose regular inspections like other healthcare clinics of clinics that provide abortion services?
We absolutely think that facilities that provide abortion services should be regulated like any other healthcare facility.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you for this conferee. Does any other committee member have a question? Yes, Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A brief follow-up for one of the chair's questions, Ms. Sweet. My question is about the parental consent. If it's indicative, and I'm a little hazy, I was here when the law was passed, but if potentially a patient, a child, is a victim of incest or, familial rape, the law now is that there must be the consent of one of the remaining parents or someone else in that, and they must present that. Where is our law now on that, and what must they provide, a minor provide, where it may be a family member who has raped or been a part of that incest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I want to say, first of all, Planned Parenthood or any other abortion provider is a mandatory reporter. So this is generally a situation, or almost always a situation, when law enforcement would be engaged at some point in the process. But in terms of getting that young person access to care, if the state statute currently says that if it is proven that a minor has been impregnated by their parent, which I know is an upsetting statement, that the two parental consent can be waived, and that their other custodial parent can sign that consent form without the father needing to sign that document.
Well, Madam Chair, Ms. We're going well beyond the hour for this, but I mean, I just don't know the mechanics of how that works. If a child shows up at the clinic and says, I've been impregnated by a parent or an uncle or a cousin, whatever, a family member, what the mechanics of that would be so that we don't go beyond, you know, a certain period of that. So again, Madam Chair, I don't know the mechanics. I don't know how, if it's working or how well it's working right now. Certainly I am concerned if and when this bill passes, how much more murkier that procedure would be for that young girl in crisis.
Sure, so anytime we see someone who is pregnant and who is below the age of consent, that is we absolutely report that to the appropriate authorities. And for a lack of, I know we're short on time, but the way that this is ultimately determined by a law enforcement authority, the origin of the pregnancy, we work with those law enforcement authorities to provide what we call the products of conception. So that is the pregnancy after there has been an abortion. And that needs to be studied by law enforcement. And I hate to talk about these grim, awful situations, but that is how a determination is made. And there is obviously an investigation into what action can be taken to keep that young person safe and to make sure that they are in a safe living environment.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sweet, and thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
Sure, of course, Senator Haley. Do you have any other questions? No. I have one final question, Ms. Sweet, for Planned Parenthood and you. Do you see an increase in the number of abortions in Kansas as a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's value neutral. I would say generally it's a bad thing because that means what we've seen based on the publicly available information from KDHE and the abortion statistics, that we're seeing, sometimes people coming from other states because they are having a difficult time accessing care where they live. And I think that's a bad thing because I think everybody should have access to safe legal abortion in their own community.
So if the overall number of abortions increase in Kansas, you're neutral on that? That's your position for Planned Parenthood?
I don't know that we have an official position on it. I think it's value neutral because I don't think it's appropriate to stigmatize abortion. What matters is that people are getting access to the care that they need. We've seen the abortion rate consistently go down because people have better access to contraception, access to sex education, and the rate of unintended pregnancies in this country and in the state of Kansas is going down. But if someone needs an abortion, I want them to be able to have an abortion. So I just can't make a decision based on this number. That's not what matters. What matters is that patients can access the care that they need when they need it.
Thank you, Ms. Sweet. And the resolution is not a ban on abortion, which is an important thing to note, and it's merely to preserve the safeguards in place that Kansas has put in place to keep women safe. So thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for the testimony of all conferees today. We're going to close the questions. That's gone way past our 10 minutes and past our 2 hours. I apologize. I will direct the committee members to the written testimony, both from the proponents and the opponents. That has been provided to you digitally. There is also one neutral written conferee, Jay Hall of the Kansas Association of Counties. Please, committee members, review the written testimony and be prepared to work the bill on Tuesday, January 19th at our regular meeting time, and that will close the hearing on SCR 1602, and I thank all the conferees for their time and traveling today with the weather, and those committee members who couldn't be here because of the weather. Thank you for joining by WebEx. Thank you for those watching and listening online as well.